Good morning. Thanks for joining us. We're going to spend the next little bit talking about the GENEDGE cybersecurity program to help you meet the DFARS 7012 requirements. And I'm going to try to get this done in under an hour. So that's the goal. And with no further ado, here's what we're going to talk about. The DFARS 252.204-7012 regulation is what is driving all of this. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to provide you the link to the actual regulation itself. You're going to need to take a look at your contracts and see if that specific regulation is embedded in your contract and you've signed up that said you are in compliance with that. That's what the real issue is. So we're going to talk about what the regulation is, what the responsibilities are for you. We're going to talk about a security definition set of specifications called NIST Special Publication 800-171. And we're going to talk about how to develop a plan of action to control what's called controlled unclassified information. The CUI is the crux of this entire effort for you. We're going to talk about the program and what the Department of Defense has provided in terms of funding support and how you can work with us to gain access to that funding. So just real briefly, quick introduction who GENEDGE is. GENEDGE is actually a division of the state government for Virginia. We are partially funded by the U.S. Department of Commerce under the NIST organization Manufacturing Extension Partnership and have been doing so for about 20 years. We're also partially funded by the state of Virginia. We're also fee-for-service using those funding sources, and then we also seek out grant programs and things like this, this DoD program as well to do a number of different activities. So our focus in all of this is to help the businesses in Virginia to succeed and grow their business. We are not a technical IT shop. We are not going to get into your system and look at the specific the details and say how you should and go in and actually make changes to your systems. What we will do is a number of support elements that we'll talk about. So what is this program? This program is focused on helping you to protect controlled unclassified information. And I'm going to talk about what that is in some detail. Your contract will have a if this is in a contract today, it'll be under DFARS 252.204-7012. If that number itself is not in there, the verbiage is, and I will tell you what the verbiage is for that regulation. This is also important to understand that it's for both the prime contractor and subcontractors. If you're prime and you have subcontractors, this prime has to make sure that the subcontractors are also in compliance with the 7012 regulation. So keep that in mind as well. So we're going to be focused on helping you identify what these requirements are, what the main things are that you need to deliver in order to be in compliance, and help you to find a way to increase the security posture of your business. So for the folks that are dialing in on the phone, if you just make sure you put your phones on mute, that will help. What we're doing here is focusing mostly on small to mid-sized supply chain firms. So the big boys have IT shops and a lot of things going on. That's really not the focus of this. Although the focus for the bigger companies is that they have to make sure that all their subcontractors are in compliance. And lots of those suppliers are smaller companies that don't have a huge budget to do IT work, and that is the intent for all of this, is to help you get in a more secure position and meet the requirements that the DoD is putting in your contracts. Also keep in mind that going forward, DoD, what we've been told by DoD officials is that going forward, they're going to require supply companies to include a system security plan as an addendum to their submissions to RFPs and to new contracts. So it won't be enough to just say, oh yes, I'm in compliance. The next step is DoD is going to ask for a copy of that to be included in your contract. The program itself is set up to allow the grant funds to pay for 80% of services related to helping you meet the requirements of 7012, and to be getting into all of the details of how to answer the questions that are defined in the NIST SP 800-171 specification document. So who's eligible? Anybody that's a supply chain company for DoD, prime or subcontractors that have 7012 requirements in their contract, and you have access to, or you're in possession of, controlled unclassified information. So we're going statewide within Virginia. We're also going, if a company has a headquarters outside of the state of Virginia, but they have IT operations inside of the state of Virginia, we can work with that local group here in Virginia and help you, because your main corporation might not be necessarily involved in 7012, but your individual departments or divisions within the state of Virginia may. So we could talk to you about doing that as well. So the way we've done this is we've broken up the activities into two phases, if you will. The first phase is to be able to go through an initial assessment by GENEDGE and collect the existing information that you have related to the requirements in 7012 and 800-171. You have to, under 7012, have a system security plan, an incident response plan, a gap analysis, which then works into a plan of action and milestones, the POAMs, and you should be doing a vulnerability scan as well from a third party. And so we're going to address all four of those major things inside of phase one. Now the phase two is optional. It's completely depends on your set of circumstances. Again, phase two would be focused on services helping you to further your security position and increase the quality of the answers that you have to the 800-171 requirements. So it's kind of a Chinese menu of things, if you will. It could be ongoing vulnerability scanning, remediation for gaps. It could be penetration testing. It could include completely redefining your network architecture and infrastructure. It can include training your staff. One of the elements that you'll find in 800-171 is there's a number of things in there about ongoing staff training and continuing to make people aware of what CUI is in particular, and then in general how to increase their usage of your systems and access to information to make it less vulnerable to being attacked by an outside entity. And it can be continuing to develop more policy, procedure, and governance definitions going forward. Now, basically, and I'll provide you a copy of this presentation afterwards. We'll send you all of this so you can read it later. Basically, this slide is going through and saying how is the actual program itself working. We've reached out to over 1,000 companies inside of Virginia that appear to be candidates or having to meet the 7012 requirements, and sent out a number of contacts to organizations, and that's what's got you here. This is an outreach webinar to expose this entire setup to you. Based on what you hear today, you would apply to GENEDGE for services, and we will talk to you directly to find out what your circumstances are and to get some more insight. And then you would apply very easily online. We'll send you a connection, a link to apply. And at that point, we will provide you with a written proposal of services that will define what needs to be done in phase one. Based on that, once we execute the phase one, we know what your gaps are and what your weaknesses are and what you need to spend time and money on. And then a second proposal for services would be defined for anything that goes into phase two. We have identified a number of Virginia-based companies that are technical in nature and are well acquainted with the SP 800-171 specifications that we can provide to you as potential vendors, if you will, service providers. We can also work with any company that you are already engaged in that is your technical support. We can work with them, try to figure out the best working relationship with that third party, and then include them in the program as well. So the first question is, I'm in compliance with what? I'm in compliance with DFARS 7012. Well, first of all, there is no definition for what compliance is. Nobody is saying, I'm in compliance, or you're out of compliance. This is a self-assessment, and it is a self-management engagement. DoD is not really providing guidance, and there's nowhere that you can go to get a certification or to have somebody say, yeah, you're in compliance with this. Keep in mind that what 7012 is saying is you must have a system security plan, an incident response plan, a gap analysis with POAMs, and you should be getting a third-party vulnerability scan that's going to look for potential avenues for attack and vulnerabilities for something bad happening to you. DoD is not saying at this point in time what a good system security plan looks like. What they're saying is they want you to defend controlled unclassified information to the best of your ability. So the first step in this is to get these 4 things going and documented so that you have a current state analysis. You know what your current state of affairs is. The POAMs and the gap analysis will say, okay, we're weak in a number of different areas. We will work with you to help identify the priorities of those potential weaknesses to say where is the best place for you to spend your time and money in order for you to better defend controlled unclassified information, because that is what DoD is concerned about. And I'll talk about what CUI is here in a second. So keep that in mind. It's not saying your entire system has to be, a fabulously documented and controlled system. What DoD wants right now is for you to capture your current state and understand where you're vulnerable and start working toward improving it. That's the intent that they have expressed to us in a number of different avenues. In fact, they're starting to run a series of training at DAU for their contracting officers to make the contracting officers more aware of what the requirement is. The contracting officers don't know IT. They don't know what a good system security plan is or what a bad security plan is. They've been put in the position of saying, just make sure that these suppliers have one. If your system is breached in some way and controlled unclassified information has been made susceptible to something either being stolen or something happening to it, you have 72 hours to notify your contracting officer of the breach. At that point in time, DoD can come back and say, all right, well, what was lost? And let's now review your system security plan, and let's review what you've been doing. And that is where the rubber will hit the road, so to speak, is if they come back and go, you said that you were secure, and now we're finding out there is no security. Now, the question is, in signing a contract that said you were in compliance or that you were following the regulations of 7012, was that a fraudulent act? That's the question down the road that the contracting officers will be asking about. Also, remember, as I said at the beginning, if you're a prime contractor and you have subs, the 7012 requirement, a regulation says, you need to know that your subcontractors also know about this and are also doing the same things that you are. So what is this 7012? Excuse me, it's safeguarding covered defense information and cyber incident reporting. It went into effect a year ago, December of 17, it was in effect. DoD said any contracts that were written after October of 17, they're going to insist on this level of documentation. I think there's a little bit of gray area in terms of how far back they're going to go, but right now this is what we're hearing, is that from 2017, October forward, they're going to be more serious about it. The link to the actual DFARS regulation is here. That is where you will actually find the regulation itself. This should also be in your contracts. What does this talk about? It talks about Security, what is adequate? Well, what is adequate? DoD is not saying what adequate is. What they're saying is, we want you to define what adequate is and under what set of rules and procedures and governance are you managing your business by, and are you looking at it? They want to know that if an incident occurs at your site related to CUI, that you have a plan of action for identifying the incident and reporting it up to your contracting officer. And then you're looking for a number of different elements that I've listed right here. I'm not going to read all this to you, but this is where these are the things that they are looking for you to have approached from a contractual standpoint. What is controlled, unclassified information and covered defense information? It's unclassified, technical, or other information. Where is it defined? It is defined at the website for the U.S. Archives, of all places. You would think it would be at DoD, but it's not. You go to this site here that I've listed, at the Archives. They have a list of what is considered to be controlled, unclassified information. The regulation itself says that the documents, either in paper form or electronic, whatever you have, must be marked as CUI. If you are collecting, developing, blah, 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 if you're sending this information around the world, you are responsible for ensuring the security of that CUI information as it's being created, stored, or sent down the wire. There are no real definitions of what good is or what bad is. The other kind of fly in the ointment here is that you could create something in your building, on your system, or in your activities, give it to the Department of Defense. They subsequently mark it as CUI. Now the question is, are you still responsible even though the document is not marked as CUI? Well, the way that DoD looks at it is, once a document is marked CUI, you, the vendor, are supposed to know that and keep up with that. They don't tell you how to do that or where to get that information from. They just say, if you gave us something and it subsequently turned into being marked as CUI, you are still responsible for maintaining that information and the security of that information. Within the DFARS 7012 regulation, it states that your system security plan should be following the specifications of a document created by the NIST organization. And I've given you the location for that document. That document now is at Rev 1, 800-171 Rev 1. They're currently working on a Rev 2. They are also currently working on a Rev 1 of the DFARS 7012 regulation itself. So DoD is stating that sometime in 2019, there will be an extended, modified DFARS 7012, and there will most likely be an extended, modified 800-171. This specification document breaks down the system security in 4 basic areas. Most of the requirements are not technical. About 1/3 of the requirements actually focus on the technology itself and in terms of how you're setting up your parameters and architecting your system. the vast majority of the requirement is governance and policy documentation stating what your position is. It could be on things like changing passwords, for example. Your policy is to say users will change their password every 30 days. And users will use a 12-character password with multiple different kinds of markings inside of it, right, with exclamation points and capitals and numbers. That is a policy statement. That's the vast majority of what this is all about. There's also a piece, a pretty good chunk in there about user behavior. What are you doing as a business to train your staff on better security methods for conducting business? So, for example, how your folks use email. How are they being trained not to download email from the Nigerian prince telling them that they have $1 million for them? There's a lot of training today that's available, and many companies are not doing anything to really train their staff in an ongoing basis. So those three things are the vast majority of all of this. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what each of these areas are, because the SP 800-171 requirements are broken down into 110 controls based on 14 different families of activities. And I'll kind of just walk through these generally to give you an understanding. So the first thing that I'm going to suggest that you do is go back and download 800-171 Rev number 1 and get yourself a copy of that document and start to take a look at this and become familiar with it. What DoD wants to know is that you are becoming aware and moving forward. What they've stated to us is that the intent out of DoD is not to try to find somebody who is not complying and take them out on the town square and beat them mercilessly in public. What they're trying to do is say, this is a challenge. They're trying to get a better control over all of the different ways that nefarious characters can get access to the Department of Defense. And over time, they want to continually lock things down and make this more and more secure. That's what their intention is. So it's a matter of making sure that you understand what's going on, that you document your current position, and that you have a plan to increase that position over time. So this is, again, this is not a one and done either. This is not where you go, okay, I wrote a system security plan and I have an incident response plan and we can now move on into other things. You're going to need to update these documents probably at least once or twice a year, probably every 6 months. Anytime you're changing, adding or deleting equipment, adding or deleting users, changing or upgrading and updating your policies and your procedures, you're going to need to update these system security plans so that it is a constantly evolving document. I will also tell you that we, GENEDGE, are also subject to this requirement and have been because we do some work with the DoD. And as a result, we have to meet these requirements. So our IT director went through all of this about 1.5 years ago, and our experience is for her to gather all this data and lock it down really took her about 6 to 8 months of elapsed time because she wasn't working on it 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. She would take this one piece at a time and just document and document and document so that by the end of that period of time, she ended up with a full system security plan. Our approach, we're going to try to do it, support you so that you do it faster than that, so that this isn't as painful as the experience that we went through. So let's talk a little bit about what these 14 families are. So the first one is all about your access controls. And the requirement itself is going to ask you how you are doing these things. It's not telling you how to do it. It's not saying you must or you shall. It's saying, how are you doing, for example, how are you limiting system access? What procedures and policies and approaches are you taking? So this is the first family of access controls. A couple things to think about here with this. When it talks about cryptographic mechanism, what that's saying is, how are you encrypting files when they're being shipped out electronically through email, when they're being downloaded or uploaded into Dropbox or some other application? It's all about documenting your choices as to why you selected to do certain kinds of things. A couple of things to consider here with this is, it's not just about the server in your building and the PCs and the laptops that you've got connected, but the vulnerabilities come into play with things like smartphones and with employee access. Let's say if they're working at home, how are they accessing your systems? How is email being managed and secured? So as you start to get into this thing, again, keep in mind, as far as DoD is concerned, all they're concerned about is CUI data. Now, in order to get a system produced with enough security to handle just CUI, you're probably looking at trying to update and manage your entire IT infrastructure. There is also another view on this to think about. You could have CUI that is not on your IT. Let's say it's just drawings and things. You only have to worry about, from this regulation standpoint, the CUI information. So if you're not storing CUI, if you can validate that you are not storing CUI on your systems, then this is basically irrelevant. So that's the research that you need to do right up front, is to make sure that you know what this CUI is for your building. So if you have drawings and things that are marked as CUI, now you're looking at physical security. So this 7012 800-171 situation is not just about electronic processes. It's also about physical access and storage of physical documents like drawings and that kind of thing. So keep that in mind as well. It's not just servers and PCs and smartphones. The second area is all about awareness and training. This is saying, how are you training your staff on identifying that they're using CUI and that they're controlling CUI? So this is where the training comes in to effect. Are you providing security training to your staff? And the question is, how are you doing it? Not that you should be doing it, once a week, once a month. The simple question is, how are you doing it, and why have you made that choice? From a leadership standpoint, why do you feel that that is secure? That's what this is about. Are you auditing the system? Are you tracing individuals and what they're doing on the systems? One of the things that we found in working with a lot of companies, smaller or larger, when people leave the company, they don't necessarily remove the users and the passwords and the access from the system. Person walks out the door, and lo and behold, they still have access to the system, and people forget about it. So that's what this specification is all about, is to say, how are you aware of employee access, and how are you invalidating users and making sure that when people leave the company that they have their access removed. This is a little bit more of a technical area, configuration management. This is about how your system itself is being set up and managed. There are a number of questions inside the specification for each of these bullet points that I've put on here. I've just kind of summarized at a bullet point level what's in there. So you have to read, you'll have to look at the specific wording of the spec to be able to know exactly what it is they're looking for. But basically it's about documenting the choices that you are making on these elements. Identification, authorization, what processes, procedures, decisions are you putting in place to validate your users, and the authorization levels. Again, sometimes people are being set up in the systems with way more access than they actually need for their job. They don't all need to be set up as an administrator, but sometimes that's what happens, just because it's the easiest, fastest thing to do when somebody comes in, and these are the things that need to be evaluated by you as well. One thing on here to think about with multi-factor identification, what that means is not only are you typing in a password into your system, but maybe you're using fingerprint verification on a PC. Maybe you're using something like the CAPTCHA method, where it's coming out, it's asking you, you know, how many cars you see on the pictures. There's a number of different ways to do multiple evaluations of who the person is, and depending on the security level and the not the security level, but the importance of the data. You know, how deeply are you connecting the system to the user and validating who they are. It's going to ask you about incident response. DFARS 7012 says you should have an incident response plan. This question is asking you just some specific elements of an incident response. This is not an incident response plan. So by answering these questions here inside of 800-171, that is not sufficient to meet that that requirement that's coming out of 7012. You need a full incident response plan. How are you maintaining the systems? What are the rules? What are the authority levels? That kind of thing. Again, more of a policy and procedure statement. How are you protecting media? This comes into place when you're moving CUI around. People taking this home. Are they putting it on their home computers? They're putting it on a smartphone. Who's accessing the smartphone? Are they letting their kids play Candy Crush on the work phone? And you know, this kind of stuff. This is what the intent is try to get some better control of the actual CUI media itself. If you're putting things on CDs and mailing them, are you putting things on the fobs? What are you doing? Going through these questions will help you also to, you know, say, all right, we've got to stop allowing that. Really, let's, you know, from now on, nobody gets to do that. That's part of the benefit of actually going through all of this for you as well, is you actually do start securing your entire business more effectively over time by doing these things. Again, questions about how are you doing personnel security. What are you doing to validate who they are and what they're accessing, and why are they accessing it? This also deals with physical security. So it's not just IT stuff necessarily. Well, it could be related to IT, but it's about how are people getting access to equipment that has CUI information. Are you using web cameras on your building? Are you using access key codes to get into your building? Are you accessing, escorting visitors, maintaining logs, all those kinds of things? That is what this section is about, saying how are you doing physical protection. Risk assessment. How are you looking at your system and understanding what your vulnerabilities are and the gaps between a strong security posture and your current security posture? And do you recognize that there's risk? And then what are you doing to address the risk? What is your process for assessing the risks? That's basically what they're looking for in this section. How are you doing security assessments? So they're not saying that you should have an outside company, but it is implying that you should by asking you the question, are you periodically having an external entity come in and take a look at my security from a process standpoint and from a setup standpoint and from a usage standpoint? So that's why we've embedded the vulnerability scanning into the phase 1 work, is this would be the first step for you to have an ongoing third-party evaluation. Do you have to have it once a month? Do you need to have it once a year? That's really a management decision that you have to document and then state why are you taking that position, right? Why do you think that a once a year vulnerability scanning is sufficient? That's basically what this section is about. How are you protecting system and communication? This part here gets a little bit more on the technical aspect of things. How is your system defined? How is your security defined? What are the levels of security that you have chosen to implement? Why have you done it? And how are you using the functionality of that third-party software or the procedures that you've got set up? It's a documentation question of how and why you're doing certain things. Again, this goes on and on. So this section 13 is fairly comprehensive in terms of the technical aspects that you're going to have to document. And then the final section is system and information integrity. Again, a combination of policy, procedure, and technology is saying how are you controlling external and internal access to things? What solutions have you deployed to monitor alerts? How are you scanning for malicious code? How are you recognizing? What methods have you chosen to recognize abnormal behavior on your system? Basically asking you how and what you have decided. So, very generically, what's an incident response plan? Incident response plan at a very high level, generic level, answers these 5 areas, right? It says, what are you doing to train your staff about how to behave once an incident occurs? What are you going to do to handle the incident? Who is going to be involved? You're going to have to notify your contracting officer. Depending on the incident, it's probably not a bad idea to have your company attorney involved and notified right away, because you want to make sure that you have coverage when you're having conversations with DoD people about an incident and what may have been lost. You want to make sure that you're not stating something that could be harmful down the road. So that may be an element of your incident handling or monitoring and reporting elements. And then the final area is, how are you testing this plan? It's one thing to have it on a piece of paper on the shelf. The other question is, do your staff know what to do when something like this happens? Are you doing some kind of benchmarking once a quarter, once every 6 months, so that people aren't in, when something happens, you're all not running around going, who's on first and what the heck are we supposed to do now? That's the intent of doing the incident response testing. It's just like any kind of contingency planning that you have for disaster recovery and that kind of thing. So, what is a security plan? The outline that we are using to create the system security plan is the basic framework developed by NIST. NIST has a document, and I think in this next screen I'll give you the list of what the actual framework looks like. But they have a definition of all of the different elements of a security plan. So basically going with that basic outline. It's talking about the boundaries of your system, what your operational environment is, what your security requirements and implementation are, and then the relationships that your system has with other systems. Those are the 4 basic elements of a security plan. And that is the guidance that I just referred to is called Special Publication 800-18. Once you get into the NIST world, you'll find out they have a ton of SP publications. So you're going to see an SP 800-53, 800-53. That's kind of the high-level security definition that NIST provides. And then they created 800-173, which is kind of like a next level down from 53. So in our approach, we're trying to include both of these things as kind of an extra step in this process. But we can talk to you specifically about that in more detail when we get involved. But here's the list to the actual security plan outline. You are one of the things that you provide to meet the regulation is that you have a system security plan. System security plan can be written up in Word using a definition like this and documenting things, and you say, well, okay, now I have a system security plan. All right. Question is, how strong is the security plan? And the strength of the security plan is tied back to 800-171. If you answer all those questions and you roll them all up into this this outline, that is meeting the regulation 7012. Then the question is, how good is it? And that is where there's a lot of gray area, because if you get breached and you have to report back to DOD and they want to come back in and do an audit on you, they can do that. The other thing we've been hearing too out of DOD is they are authorizing more and more audits out into the world. What we are hearing is that the Navy right now is kind of the most aggressive about this. I don't know if you've heard, but the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research and Development, ASN RDA, came out with a guidance email document to all of the Navy commands about maybe 3 months ago, and stated basically, you guys need to go out there and make sure the suppliers are in fact meeting 7012 and doing the things that the DoD has put into regulation. So there is more and more focus on enforcing this thing. So what we've been told by DoD is that they have DCMA going out doing a lot more audits, and they have what's this other group? I'm looking at my note real quick. I'll find it in a second. I'll move on, but it's DCMA in particular, and the Navy got themselves in some hot water for some breaches that have been going on lately through some suppliers. So they're particularly sensitive to this whole subject. What's a vulnerability scan? So one of the things that we employ in this whole process is using an outside entity to do a scan of your network. And they're basically putting a piece of software onto your system that's watching the activity on the system, and then coming back and giving a report, and it's saying these are the things that are occurring on your system that are not following standard security processes or procedures, and saying that these areas are potential spots for an outside party to come in and break into your system and take things and break things. So what our process here is, we send you a link for an application if you want one. The application doesn't commit you to anything. It just simply says, I want to go into the program. I think that this is helpful for me. It's not a commitment to anything. We will contact you directly and talk with you one-on-one, and we'll find out what your current situation is in terms of how well you have documented any of these things. And then from that conversation, we will put together a proposal for services. The services for phase one. Now, what we've also seen is that some companies have already engaged a third party in doing some of this phase one work, meaning you're in the process of doing an SSP, incident response plan, and a gap analysis. That's fine. We can pick up from that point and work on just phase two work if that's your particular scenario. And everything really kind of depends. So I hate to say everything depends, but everyone is in a different status on this. So that's what we do first of all, figure out what you need, and then if you choose to go forward on this, remember that the services that we will propose will be 80% paid by grant and 20% paid by you, the end client. What are we going to do with phase one? We will do a questionnaire assessment to gather information from you. We will roll that up into a system that we have licensed, or we can use some other mechanism if you prefer doing it a different way. If you want to do it manually, or if you have another company that you're engaged with, or what have you, we can work with you on what makes some sense. And we can then help you create the system security plan in a Word format so that you'll have that document. There will be a gap analysis that comes out of that that says, well, based on the answers that you have, your current state, you'll have the gap. And then we will help you figure out the priorities of those gaps, because you may have to buy new software or hardware, or you may have to just reconfigure what you already have. And we don't know that until we get in there and open up the closet. So then we will say, okay, here's the POAMs, and work with you to come up with your priorities. And then you go, so now we have a plan and a way to improve the plan. And then the third thing is we will help you write out the incident response plan. We have templates, and we have some information that we can provide to you to help speed that process up and get that incident response plan done faster. And then we can use a third party to do the vulnerability scan. You can use our third party that we have chosen to work with. There are other third parties that we can also recommend to you. And as a government entity, we're trying to be equal and open to as many companies as we possibly can in this situation. So it really, again, it's going to come down to where you are in this process. Do that third-party vulnerability scan, and then that will give you a current state against the 7012. It's not that DoD wants you to have this great thing coming right out of the chute. What they want is current state and an active plan to move forward. That is the intent right now. So this year you can get this together, get documented. Now you're okay, and then you continue to improve and make this thing stronger and stronger. Now you are meeting the intent of what these folks are looking for at the Department of Defense. So given all of that, here is our contact information. I'm going to recommend that you contact David Bartlow directly, because he's doing all of the program management of documents and applications and all that kind of thing. David and I are working together very closely on all this stuff. There are a couple of different things that we put up on the website for you to review as well. Information about cybersecurity things of interest. And at this point, that concludes my statement. So I'm going to turn this over to Dave and let him finalize. So thank you for your attendance and your interest.